Good evening, everybody. I'm over here in Singapore, so it's probably good night for me very soon. But I want to say that I'm not an expert on energy and energy circular economy, but I wanted to say a few things that I have observed which are relevant to our discussion today. And the first thing I want to say is that, because of coronavirus, what the surveys are telling us that there are two groups of people, if you think of people who are pro-environment and people who are, let's say, anti or nonchalant about environment, and both the groups are saying that they after this crisis they have become more concerned about the environment. So that's what the surveys tell us. Now, of course, as a marketing professor, I know there's a difference between what customers say they want, between what they have experienced during coronavirus and how they will behave after the thing. So right now what they're saying is because of the coronavirus, they've become more conscious of the environment. Why have they become more conscious about the environment is a hypothesis we can make. But let me give you one example. One example is that if you are living like a large portion of my friends and family do in India, it is the first time in your lifetime that you have been able to see visibly places which were within your eyesight but were crowded, but were covered by pollution and dust, because the traffic stopped, because economic activity stopped. Suddenly people were able to see, for example, the India Gate in Delhi. They could see the mountains from places where they had not seen the mountain ranges for a long time, even though they should have been visible, but the pollution was just overcasting all of these things. So that's what made them realize that, listen, there is another way of living which would allow us to have a healthier lifestyle, both in terms of the breathing problems we face, as well as the cleaner air and the visibility of the beauty of it. This, including, you have seen many of these videos that were shown early in the process where they had animals come out on the streets and things like that, which was also very common, not only in India, but also in Singapore, we had them do that. The second thing I want to say about the closure is that the closure made, because restaurants were closed all over the world, delivery services took off. And this is very relevant for our discussion because what happened was in these delivery services, the use of plastic, of course, went up dramatically. And so I have friends of mine who, whenever I order anything on delivery, they say, Nirmalya, how can you do that? Because there's so much plastic being used. So I think that has also made us more conscious because suddenly all this food is arriving in plastic packages because in the end, plastic is a very efficient and very flexible and multi-purpose kind of material, regardless of the environmental concerns about it. So that's another thing that. Now the question becomes, what will happen after the coronavirus to environmental concerns? And this is where I have a different view from what the surveys are saying. I think after this crisis gets over, countries will need to jumpstart the economy. And my worry is, my fear is that in this jumpstarting of economy, concerns about the environment, which were very, upfront for the last, let's say, half a decade, will get pushed to the back burner. So as China needs to open up its factories, as India needs to open up its factory, as Bangladesh needs to open up its factories, as well as economic activity in the rest of the world, will we still be concerned about the environment in the face of employment pressures, income pressures, as well as, the general economic state of economic activity. So I'm a bit worried about that, and even though, still, what is a very stable finding is that consumers in study after study say, around 2/3 of them say that they would support purpose-driven firms. That's what they say in the surveys, though we know from our own studies that even though 2/3 say that they would support purpose-driven firms, when you look at their behavior, only about a quarter do actually support purpose-driven firms when it comes to time. And so that would have brought me to the next slide, but without the slide, let me just tell you what was in it. And when you look at, because of coronavirus, what is happening is, one of the things that this time has given us is given us the time to reflect on, our work-life balance. And consumers have also started re-looking at consumption, which was stopped in many cases as stores were closed and restaurants were closed and hotels were closed and travel was closed. And what people are saying is, do we really need to have as complex a life and consume as much? And there's a segment that's coming up, which is called, which I call life simplifiers, who are saying, let's simplify our life and consume less. The second segment, which was always there and is still there, is the conservationists, These are people who are motivated by the deterioration to the current environment, and they would like to reduce, reuse, recycle, as you know, and repair things instead of throw them away. And then there are the sustainability people segment, which is really not so much concerned about the current generation, but more concerned about future generation and whether the earth can sustain the kind of population and the consumption that we are doing. Now, when I put these groups into two segments, the proactive people, these are people who are about 35% in surveys of developed nations who say they are willing to pay more for products and services which are environmentally, better. They're willing to pay more. And when you ask them how much are they willing to pay more, they generally give a number around 5%. And at 10%, we know this segment goes away to zero. So people are willing to pay a little bit more, but it has to be around 5% is what they say, after which they start walking away from paying more for a firm or a product that is environmentally more friendly. The other thing to remember over here is that this, of course, differs by category. If the share of wallet is small and the environmental impact is large, they're willing to pay more in terms of the product and service to be environmentally friendly. If the share of wallet is large, that means that consumption of that category is a large share of my total budget. And if the environmental impact is low, then of course, people are less willing to pay a premium for environmentally friendly products. That's one segment, the proactive segment. Then there is a second segment, which we must not forget, which is the consumers who are environmentally conscious, who are not willing to pay more for environmentally friendly products or services, but they are willing, but what they don't want is firms doing harm. And they say, we will boycott firms that do harm. So we won't pay more, but in our choices, we will boycott firms that do harm. And these results are, of course, dependent on the age. When you go to people paying more, 1/3 of those people, if you get to people who are below the age of 34, that number goes up to 45%. If you get to people above the age of 55, then that number goes to only 14%, because maybe they have a limited lifespan to see. Same thing, if you go to emerging markets, the percentages are much smaller. If you are in the Western European countries, the percentages are much higher. US is somewhere in the middle with a strong segment that is environmentally conscious, but another segment that's not. So if you're going to have, what we say, brand promise is what you promise to the customer. Brand positioning is what you are promising to your customer, which is different from the competitors. And brand purpose is a higher calling. Here you're saying, this is what we stand for as a firm, which is better than just looking after our consumers. And of course, more and more companies are thinking about brand purpose. The problem with brand purpose is, and I think this is a problem for most companies that engage in it, is you have to be authentic. It's simply not enough to say something and not do it. So it is better not to have a brand purpose. But if you're going to have a brand purpose where you say, I care about something beyond just the consumers and the shareholders, then you better be willing to live it. And the example I like to use over here is Patagonia, because of course you build this culture and you build this authenticity from your employees inside out, rather than from the consumers inside. And in Patagonia, which looks at itself as a place which does an unusual blend of work, play, family, and environmentalism, how do they make themselves credible about the fact that they care about the environment? Well, what they do is that they basically do give certain benefits to the employees. For example, they are paid environmental internships. They give time off for civil disobedience training so that their employees can go and, go on marches, go on protests, go on all kinds of activities to actually actively engage with environmentalism in a positive way. They also give people reimbursements if you commute to work, but if you come in a car, you don't get the reimbursement. And finally, they also have a flex time policy, which allows you to catch a good swell because that's part of their brand. And as a result, their employee turnover is 4% in an industry where the employee turnover is only 21%, and Patagonia is now, of course, a much loved brand among the youth of this world, especially the developed world. So that was what I wanted to say, was that, we have to think about environmentalism from the consumer's perspective and realize that there are segments in the market. Some segments are willing to pay a premium for this. Other segments are not willing to pay a premium, but they will not engage or patronize a company which they feel is doing harm to the environment. And then there's, of course, a third group of consumers for whom this is not a concern. And we need to figure out how we are going to manage with all of these three groups. And then the last thing I want to say that, there is, of course, nowadays a very big, what you call, initiative on stakeholder value creation instead of simply shareholder value creation, which says that instead of just caring about shareholder and shareholder wealth, firms should worry about all their different stakeholders, including employees, consumers, the general greater environment and the community in which they survive. And the question becomes, is there a conflict between the two? And if there is a conflict, which there will be sometimes, how do you resolve it? Because that's where you show your values, because you have to live your values rather than proclaim them.